Felix Zander balanced a silver tray in one hand and adjusted his wrinkled collar with the other, just as a gust of rooftop wind threatened to knock over the glasses of imported red wine. The skyline sparkled behind him, but all Felix could think about was how he had to pick up his daughter from his neighbors after this shift, pray his paycheck wouldn't bounce again, and try to fix the busted heater in their tiny apartment before the week ended. The launch event was for some luxury tech company he couldn't pronounce. He didn't care. He was hired through a catering agency that didn't ask questions and paid in cash. That was enough. He made his way through the rooftop garden, offering wine with a polite smile while dodging conversations he didn't belong in. Laughter floated around him, polished, easy, the kind that came from people who never had to check a price tag. "May I offer you a glass?" he asked, stopping in front of a woman dressed in black satin with a low, open back. Her heels looked like they cost more than his rent, but she turned around with a surprised blink, as if she wasn't expecting anyone to speak to her. She was stunning. Not in the fake, overdone way most guests were. Her dark curls framed her face, and her eyes, deep, sharp, curious, locked with his. She stared at him for a second too long before taking a glass. "Thanks," she said, her voice warm and calm. "You don't work here, do you?" Felix raised a brow. "I'm wearing the apron, aren't I?" Something about the way he said it made her laugh, not the shallow kind, a real laugh. "I meant you don't fit in with the rest of them," she said. "They're all fake smiles and name-dropping. You're not pretending," he blinked. No one ever said things like that to him. "I don't have time to pretend," she tilted her head. "What's your name?" He hesitated. The caterer rule was clear: don't mingle, don't talk unless you're spoken to, don't ever give your name, but something about her made him forget the rules. Felix. "Felix Zander," her lips curved. "I'm Fallon Zera." He didn't recognize the name, but she had the kind of confidence that came from growing up with money or power. Maybe both. A man in a blue velvet suit called her name from across the rooftop. "Fallon, come meet the board," she gave Felix a look. "Duty calls." He nodded once. "Enjoy the wine," she hesitated. "Hey, do you like pasta?" He blinked. "What? Pasta, real pasta, not the overpriced stuff they dish out at these parties." He laughed once. "Sure," she smiled. "Then I owe you dinner." Before he could answer, she was gone, her heels clicking against the rooftop tile as she disappeared into the crowd. Felix stood there, confused. What just happened? 3 days later, she showed up at the small Italian spot where he sometimes helped in exchange for leftover food. She walked in like she didn't notice the chipped paint on the walls or the broken ceiling fan. Instead, she walked straight up to him and said, "Told you I owed you pasta." "You were serious?" he asked, wiping flour off his hands. She shrugged. "I don't say things I don't mean." He watched her for a moment. She didn't seem fazed by the peeling walls or the sound of a baby crying in the corner. She didn't flinch when he said, "I can't afford to eat here." "I can," she said simply. "Sit." They ate carbonara and drank tap water. She asked about his daughter, and he found himself talking more than he had in months. About how Hope was 7, about her drawings on the fridge, about the way she always made him laugh even when everything felt like it was falling apart. "You named her Hope," Fallon said gently. "She saved my life," he said. Hope felt right. They walked out together after, and she paused before getting into her car. "I like you, Felix," he swallowed. "You don't know me. I know you're real." "That's more than I can say about most people in my world." "What world is that?" She opened the car door, then looked at him over her shoulder. "The kind where people expect you to be cold to survive." Then she was gone. Over the next few weeks, she kept showing up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with sandwiches, once with a pair of brand new sneakers for Hope. "She deserves better than duct tape," she said, brushing off his protests. They met at the park, at the diner near his place, sometimes just on the street while he walked Hope home from school. Felix didn't ask questions. He didn't push, but one night, after Hope had fallen asleep in her room and Fallon had stayed late helping clean up from dinner, he finally asked, "Why me?" "You're not like anyone else I know," she said. "You don't try to impress me. You don't ask what I do or what I own. You see me?" He looked her in the eyes. "And what do you do?" She hesitated. Then quietly she said, "I run Zera Capital." He blinked. "That's the company from the rooftop event." She nodded. "I'm the CEO." He stared at her. "You're a billionaire." "Yes." He stepped back. She reached for him, Felix, but he shook his head. You're a billionaire. You've been showing up at my place, buying gifts for my daughter, eating pasta in a restaurant that doesn't have working bathrooms, and you didn't think to mention you're a billionaire. I didn't want that to be what mattered. He laughed, bitter. It matters. Why? Because I've spent my whole life being invisible to people like you. She stepped closer. But you're not invisible to me. He looked at her, torn. I don't care about the money, she said. I care about how you look at Hope. I care about how you carry everything on your shoulders and never complain. I care about you. He didn't say anything, so she left, but she didn't stop loving him. The rain hadn't stopped in 2 days. Felix leaned against the laundromat's back wall, watching the dryers spin while Hope sat cross-legged on the cracked linoleum, coloring in a book someone had left behind weeks ago. He'd promised her grilled cheese after this. He hadn't figured out how he was going to buy bread yet, but she didn't need to know that. The door creaked open behind them. He turned instinctively and froze. Fallon stood in the doorway, umbrella dripping, coat clinging to her frame. Her eyes swept the room until they landed on him. I called your neighbor, she said quietly. She told me where you were. Felix straightened. You shouldn't be here. She closed the umbrella and stepped inside. You didn't answer the door for 4 days. I was busy. You think I don't understand what it's like to be shut out? He folded his arms. I think you've never had to figure out how to stretch $8 across a week. Hope looked up. Hi, Fallon. Fallon smiled gently. Hi, sweetheart. Felix's voice softened. Hope, go finish your picture inside the folding room. Hope nodded and skipped off, her curly ponytail bouncing with each step. Fallon waited until the door clicked shut. I didn't lie to you, Felix. I didn't say you did. You looked at me like I betrayed you. He stared at the dryer window. You make it hard to breathe, Fallon. You walk into my life like you belong in it, and it messes with everything I've spent years building to protect Hope. To protect myself. I never asked you to give that up. You didn't have to. He turned to face her. You're part of a world that eats people like me alive. I stepped out of it for you. He shook his head. You stepped aside. There's a difference. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. I came to give you this. I don't want your money. It's not money. She held it out. Open it. He hesitated, then took it and unfolded the paper. His eyes scanned the lines once, then again. You got Hope into Westwood Academy. She deserves better than public school with broken heaters. It's a full scholarship. She earned it. He looked up. You pulled strings. I made a call. But it was her drawings that got her the interview. They loved her. His hand tightened around the paper. Why would you do this? Because I care about her, and because I can't stand watching you pretend you don't want more. He stared at her, jaw clenched. You say that like I haven't given everything I've got. That's not what I meant. No, because it sure sounded like you think I'm afraid of ambition. I just don't want to owe anyone, especially not you. You wouldn't owe me. This isn't a transaction, Felix. Everything with people like you is a transaction. She stepped closer, her voice low. Is that what you think this is? That I showed up to fold your laundry and buy your daughter's sneakers because I expect something in return? He didn't answer. She exhaled slowly. I asked your neighbor to watch Hope for a few hours. I didn't come here to fight. His eyes flicked to the folding room door. You talked to Mrs. Karpinski, she said. Hope drew a picture of me, said she called me your friend. He dropped his gaze. I'm not trying to fix you, Felix. I just want to show up however you'll let me. His voice was quiet. I don't know how to let someone like you in. Then let's start small. She stepped back, giving him space. Come to dinner this Friday, my place, just you and Hope. He hesitated. You don't have to, I want to. She looked down, then added, and not at some penthouse. I bought a townhouse in Park Terrace. It's quiet, no press, no staff, just me. You bought a place to have dinner with us. I bought a place because I didn't want to be the woman who only lives in glass towers. I wanted something real. He studied her face, not a trace of performance, no flicker of manipulation. I'll think about it, he said finally. She nodded once. Good. Then she turned and walked out into the rain. Felix stood there for a long time, the envelope still in his hand. The dryers hummed behind him, and from the folding room he heard Hope humming. He looked down at the paper again. Westwood Academy, full scholarship. Acceptance confirmed. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his jacket. Fallon's presence had cracked something open in him. Not with grand displays or pity, but with quiet, stubborn persistence. She hadn't tried to change his world. She just stepped into it and asked to stay. And despite everything in him that screamed to keep the distance, he wasn't sure he wanted her to leave. Felix stood at the top of the sandstone steps, Hope's hand tucked tightly in his. The townhouse in Park Terrace was smaller than he'd expected, not the kind of place a billionaire would choose. No security guards, no iron gates, just a red door, a porch light glowing softly against the dusk, and curtains that swayed gently with the breeze from the open window above. Hope bounced once beside him. "Do we knock?" Felix hesitated. Before he could answer, the door opened. Fallon wore a soft blue sweater, her dark curls tucked behind her ears. For the first time, she didn't look like someone who lived in a world he couldn't touch. She looked like someone waiting. "I didn't think you'd come," she said simply. "I almost didn't," Felix said, then added. Hope insisted. Hope grinned. "You said we could if we had time." Fallon's lips curved as she stepped aside. "Well then, come in." The inside was nothing like he expected. The furniture was simple, warm-toned. A stack of books sat on the windowsill. A bowl of apples rested on the counter. In the corner, an easel with a half-finished painting stood near a window splashed with gold from the setting sun. Fallon caught him looking. "I paint when I can't sleep." "You paint badly," she said. "But it keeps me quiet." Hope wandered into the living room, her hands behind her back as she inspected the shelves. Fallon watched her for a moment before turning back to Felix. "I made lasagna. It might be slightly overdone. I haven't cooked for anyone in years." She led them into the kitchen where the table was already set. No caterers, no polished servers, just 3 plates, a vase with 2 sunflowers, and the scent of garlic and tomatoes filling the room. Dinner passed with laughter. Hope couldn't stop giggling at Fallon's impression of a boardroom argument, and Fallon listened intently as Hope described her latest story about a dragon who only ate pancakes. Felix watched them, unsure which part unsettled him more, how easily Hope took to her, or how natural it felt to have Fallon at the table. After dinner, while Hope worked on a puzzle in the living room, Fallon poured 2 glasses of wine and joined Felix on the back porch. The sky was deep violet, stars just beginning to blink awake above the city. A soft breeze stirred the leaves of the ivy climbing the fence. "You don't talk much when you're relaxed," Fallon said, taking a sip. "I don't get relaxed often." She leaned against the railing. "You want to ask me something, I can see it." He looked at her for a long moment. "Why us? You mean why you and Hope?" He nodded. She looked out at the streetlights. "Because I've spent years surrounded by people who only care about outcomes, numbers, strategy, but you. You're about the process. You show up, you stay, you give everything without expecting applause. That's not a reason to fall for someone. It is when you've never had that before." He looked down at the wine in his hand. "I don't know how to be with someone who has everything." She turned to him. "I don't have everything, Felix. I didn't grow up with any of this. My father died when I was 12. My mother worked 3 jobs and still couldn't keep the lights on some months. When I was 16, I started tutoring rich kids in math just to buy groceries. The rest came later." He blinked. "You built Zera Capital from that?" "It wasn't always called that. I started with nothing but a laptop and a list of hedge fund managers who never called me back, but I kept going. I didn't sleep for years." He stared at her like he was seeing her for the first time. "Why didn't you tell me that before?" "Because I didn't want to lead with it. I didn't want to have to prove I've earned what I have." He nodded slowly. "I get that." She reached across the space between them, brushing her fingers lightly over his. "I'm not asking you to change your life for me. I'm just asking if there's room in it." He didn't answer. Not yet. When they returned inside, Hope had fallen asleep on the couch, one hand still resting on the puzzle pieces. Fallon covered her with a light blanket and turned to Felix. "You can stay here tonight if you want. The guest room's made up." "No pressure." He hesitated, torn between comfort and pride. "I'll put her to bed," he said finally, lifting Hope gently into his arms. Fallon led him to the small guest room, opened the door softly, and stepped back. He laid Hope down and tucked the blanket around her. When he turned back, Fallon was still there. "Thanks," he said. She leaned against the doorframe. "For what?" "For making it feel like we belong here. You do." He stepped out, closing the door quietly behind him. They stood there, inches apart, neither speaking, neither moving. Then she whispered, "You don't have to kiss me." "But I'd like it if you did." He didn't answer. He just stepped forward and did exactly that. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was honest. And it was the first thing he'd done in a long time that felt like it might lead to something worth holding on to. The gala was held in a domed conservatory just outside the city, surrounded by acres of manicured gardens and glass walls that shimmered under 1,000 strands of suspended lights. Felix adjusted the collar of his charcoal suit as he stepped out of the black car. Hope's small hand curled around his fingers, her silver shoes tapping lightly on the stone path. "You sure this is okay?" he asked. Fallon stepped beside him in a gold gown that shimmered like sunlight, her expression calm but unreadable. "You're not crashing. Your names are on the list." He glanced at the entrance where camera flashes lit the air. "Feels like a different planet." She arched a brow. "Then let's make a new orbit." Hope tugged on his hand. "Do they have cupcakes?" Fallon smiled. "Only the best." Inside, the air was warm with soft music and the scent of orchids. Waitstaff passed with silver trays and a string quartet played near the fountain. Felix tried to ignore the glances as they moved through the room, not judgmental, just curious. He didn't recognize anyone, but everyone seemed to recognize Fallon. She leaned over. "They're staring because they've never seen me arrive with anyone before." He kept his voice low. "And bringing me is supposed to make a statement." "No," she said. "It's supposed to make me happy." A tall man in a navy suit intercepted them near the edge of the room. "Fallon, I was hoping you'd show." Felix watched as Fallon's posture shifted, still poised but alert. "Lucien," she said, offering a cool nod. Lucien's eyes drifted to Felix, then to Hope. "And these are," Felix extended a hand. "Felix Zander, my daughter Hope." Lucien shook once, his grip firm. "I've read your name. You're the one who flagged the Zera analytics error last quarter." "Yes." Felix blinked. "That was an accident. I wasn't trying to. You saved us from a lawsuit." Fallon's brows lifted. "You never told me that." Felix shrugged. "Didn't think it mattered." Lucien chuckled. "Well, it did. And it shows you've got a sharp eye." Hope tugged at Fallon's dress. "Can I go see the cupcakes now?" Fallon bent down. "Only if you promise not to eat 5, 3.5, deal." Hope raced off toward the dessert table and Fallon turned to Felix. "You flagged analytics. I noticed something off in one of the quarterly reports you left on the kitchen table. I made a few notes. You rewrote the data model. I cleaned it up. It wasn't a big deal." She stared at him. "It kind of is." Lucien leaned closer. "We're hiring for a data integrity consultant. If you're interested." Felix hesitated. "I don't have a degree." "We don't care. We care about results." Fallon stepped in. "We'll talk about that later." Lucien raised a hand in mock surrender. "Of course." When he walked away, Felix turned to her. "You didn't set that up." "I didn't know about it, but I'm glad he offered." "I'm not sure I want to work for your company." "I'm not asking you to, I'm just saying. If you want to build something outside of survival, you deserve the chance." He looked around, taking in the crowd, the chandeliers, the buzz of polished conversations. "This still feels like I'm borrowing someone else's life." "You're not." She stepped closer. "This is your life. If you want it." He didn't answer right away. Across the room, Hope was laughing with one of the servers, cupcake frosting on her nose. She looked free, unburdened by the weight he'd carried alone for so long. "What if I mess it up?" he said. Fallon's voice was soft. "Then we'll figure it out together." He turned to her. "I don't want to be something you pity. You're not. You're the one I admire most." He searched her face. "You mean that?" "I mean it more than I've ever meant anything." A voice interrupted them, an older woman with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes. "Fallon, dear, introducing me to your date." Fallon smiled. "Of course. Aunt Alira, this is Felix Zander." "Felix, my aunt." Alira's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "The one who made Fallon stop working weekends." Felix cleared his throat. "I didn't know that was me." Alira gave a rare, approving nod. "About time." Fallon laughed. "Can we not interrogate him on the first night?" Alira shrugged. "Just making sure he breathes fire if needed." Felix chuckled. "Only when absolutely necessary." Later, after the speeches and the dancing and Hope's third cupcake, Fallon led Felix to a terrace overlooking the lake. The moon reflected off the water, and the wind carried the distant hum of the city. She turned to him, eyes clear. "There's something I haven't said." He waited. "I've been offered a contract to expand Zera internationally. I'd be gone for a year." His chest tightened. "When?" "In 2 weeks," he exhaled slowly. "And you waited to tell me tonight." "I didn't want to pressure you. I wanted you to decide this on your own." He stepped back. "What are you asking me to decide? If you'd come with me, you and Hope. I bought a home in Lisbon. Quiet, near a good school. It's not forever, just a start." He looked at her. "You'd move your whole life for us." "I already have." He looked past her at the lake, then back at her face, the one that never demanded anything but somehow made him want to give everything. And he realized he didn't feel like he was borrowing a life anymore. He felt like he'd found the one that had been waiting for him all along. "I'll come," he said, "but only if we do it together." She stepped forward. "Always." He kissed her again, this time with no hesitation, no fear. Just certainty. Behind them, Hope pressed her nose to the glass, whispering something to her cupcake as if it, too, needed to know that sometimes. Love really did change everything. Rain dotted the cobbled street as Felix stepped into the bakery, shaking off his umbrella. The scent of fresh brioche and sea salt butter filled the air, and the soft jingle of the bell overhead was met with a familiar voice from behind the counter. "You're early." Fallon emerged from the back, her apron dusted with flour, a streak of cinnamon across her cheek. She tucked a curl behind her ear, not bothering to wipe the smudge. "I didn't want to miss the first batch," Felix said, setting down a folded newspaper. "Hope was adamant I bring the raspberry ones. She's got a class picnic today. She'll be the most popular kid there. She already is." She painted the principal's dog and gave it wings. She did what? Wings. Purple ones. Said it was for emotional balance. The principal cried, laughing. Fallon leaned on the counter, her eyes dancing. "She's going to run the world. She already thinks she does." They shared a quiet smile, the kind that didn't need to say what had already been lived. It had been almost a year since they moved into the sunlit Lisbon home on the hillside, its whitewashed walls and blue shutters now warm with memory. Felix had taken the consulting offer, not with Zera Capital, but with a small independent firm that allowed him to work remotely. He spent his mornings analyzing data sets and his afternoons helping Hope with science projects that involved suspicious amounts of glitter. Fallon had opened the bakery 6 months ago. She never announced it publicly. No press, no investors. Just a small place with 6 tables, a chalkboard menu, and a lemon tree growing beside the door. She baked most mornings herself, something she confessed she'd always dreamed of doing but never had time for. Felix watched her now as she slipped a tray of croissants onto the cooling rack, her movements quick and practiced. Her world had changed, but she hadn't lost her edge. She still held meetings with her international team twice a week, still made high-level decisions with ease. But when she was here, she was entirely present. "Are you staying for coffee?" she asked. "For 5 minutes. I promised Hope I'd be at the school by 9. Fallon poured 2 cups from the press behind her, sliding one his way. "Lucien called yesterday," she said, taking a sip. "He wants to fly in and discuss merging his startup with ours." "Yours," Felix corrected. "I want no part of Lucien's spreadsheets. He offered to host it at a vineyard. I think he's trying to bribe me with wine. Dangerous tactic. Could work." She tilted her head. "Would you come with me?" He blinked. "To a vineyard business meeting, to Portugal's Douro Valley in the springtime with someone who loves you." He reached for her hand. "Only if I get to bring the woman who makes the best almond tarts on this coast." "That's negotiable." They drank in silence for a moment, the morning bustle of the city humming outside the windows. Then she said, "I've been thinking. Always dangerous." She nudged his knee under the counter. "I want to buy the studio next door, expand the bakery, add a reading nook, maybe run weekend art classes for kids." He raised a brow. "You're going to teach?" "No, you are. Hope already volunteered you," he laughed. "Of course she did." "I'll run the front, you take the back." "We make it ours." He leaned forward. "You sure you're ready for that?" "I'm sure I was waiting for exactly this." When he got up to leave, Fallon walked him to the door. As he stepped out, he paused. "I forgot to tell you. Hope's teacher asked about you yesterday." "Oh." She said you're the first parent who ever donated cupcakes with edible glitter and a hand-drawn map of Atlantis on the box. Fallon shrugged. Every expedition needs good snacks. He kissed her quickly, brushing flour from her cheek with his thumb. We'll see you at dinner. I'll make the stew you like. He started down the street, the paper bag of pastries tucked under one arm. Fallon watched him go until he turned the corner, waving once just before he disappeared. Back inside, she flipped the sign to closed and turned toward the kitchen. The day had barely started, but it already felt full. Later that evening, the three of them sat on the terrace behind the house, bowls of stew in their laps, stars blinking to life above the terracotta rooftops. Hope told a story about a magical fox who lived in the bakery's oven and only came out when no one was watching. Fallon listened with rapt attention, asking questions, adding plot twists. Felix leaned back in his chair, watching the two of them, his heart so full it was almost hard to breathe. And when Hope eventually fell asleep against Fallon's shoulder, her curls tangled in the folds of her cardigan, Felix reached for Fallon's hand. "You know," he murmured, "I think we've finally stopped running." Fallon looked at him, her voice quiet. "No. We just started arriving." He kissed her knuckles, slowly, the night air wrapped around them like a promise. They didn't need chandeliers or rooftop galas anymore, they had each other, they had home.